Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and these are some stormtroopers for StarWars Legion that I painted up recently, and I didn't record any footage of that painting, but you'll notice that the bases aren't very interesting. In fact, they are the bare plastic with no details, terrain, or paint whatsoever. And I've been meaning to do a tutorial on 3D modelling for some time now, so why not combine these things into this here video. There are more artistic based 3D modelling programs like ZBrush or Blender, but as an engineer I use the more mechanical side of 3D modelling programs. Inventor, Design Spark Mechanical, or as I will show you in this video what I use at the moment, Fusion 360. Fusion has a free personal use version, and that's what I'm using here. There's also educational and full professional licenses if you need that sort of thing. When you open up the program, you are greeted with a white void, into which we can create some geometry. For all of the basic stuff that I'll look at today, you use a plane in the space to draw a two-dimensional sketch, and then pull that sketch into the third dimension to make a 3D shape, a 3D body. Here we can see the construct tool for making new planes, and you can get a bit interesting with those, but you can also see that the origin planes are visible from the beginning as these orange squares, and you can easily use those. But I will make a new plane at 45-degree angle just to make things easier for me later on, and I can either click and drag or enter a specific number, and I'll enter that as 45 degrees. Now I can select the Create Sketch tool and then select that offset plane, or in your case you might use the flat XY plane, the horizontal one. And that immediately takes me into the 2D sketch, and I have all of the two-dimensional tools to use, including a grid to work from if that is helpful for the projects you're working on. The first thing I want to do is make a circle that's the same size as the top of the base, which is 25mm, and that just helps me to work in the right scale and not make things massively too big or too small. So I'll select the circle tool up here, which defaults to the center point method. I can click where I want the center point to be over on the left, and then I can either move the cursor and click, or I can enter a specific number, and I'm going to type in 25mm. Now I'm not actually going to be using this circle in my geometry, I just want it off to the side so that I have a reasonable idea of scale of what I'm making. And I have chosen, by the way, I should have mentioned this at some point, that I'm going to be making some spaceship floors, some spaceship decks, to go on the original bases as base toppers. So most of what I really want is just going to be squares and rectangles, and that makes things nice and easy. So I'll select the rectangle option up here, which defaults to opposing corners, and I just click twice for those corners, and hey, I've got a rectangle. If I wanted to place a feature a specific distance apart, there are a few methods, and the one you're supposed to use are the constraints, but I'm going to use easy mode and use the offset tool here. This can make a shape larger and kind of make a ring around an existing shape, or if you turn off to chain selection and just have one edge, you can offset one side and draw a new rectangle from this. In my case, I'm leaving a 1mm gap, and the grid is 1mm, and so for me it's just really easy to use the grid. Well, rectangles are cool and all, but I should make something at least a little more interesting, so how about a vent? Under the Create menu here, there's a whole bunch of other shapes and the different ways of making those shapes. And if you're new to the software, you should have fun and play around with some of these and see what you can make. But I want to use the slot shape and start making a vent. Rather than spending the rest of the afternoon just making lots of slots to make my vent, there is the rectangular pattern tool here that can repeat shapes. This works in 2 dimensions if you want it to make a grid, but I only need 1 dimension, and I can either drag it or enter values here to make my little vent. For some more of a Star Warsy greeble, I can create a circle and a rectangle, and another tool here is the circular repeat tool to recreate my rectangle around the point that I chose, the center point of the circle in this case. And there's plenty of options and different ways of doing this, again just play around and see what you like. Now to border this, I can go to Create Rectangle tool and select the center point rectangle and start off at the center point of the circle so that the greeble that I just made lines up in the middle of the rectangle, but I didn't place it very well and I'm too close to some of the other stuff and I'll end up cutting off the top of it. But I can use another option over here on the side, the construction line. And what that does is everything I draw from now on will be dashed lines, and that doesn't affect any geometry, but it can be used to place lines over the top that do affect the geometry. Now if I go to use the standard line tool and turn off the construction line, so I'm making real lines again, I can draw a new box, one line at a time, and my cursor will snap to the construction lines, but I can extend it outside if I want to. There's even a helpful feature here. If I hover over a point, it will let me hang out in the same line and make a nice rectangle with 90-degree corners. Now you can see the construction rectangle doesn't affect the selection of the whole shape, and we'll see that again later on when we go into 3D mode. What I have so far is just about big enough for one base, but I want to extend it in a few directions, and so I have enough space to make a few different designs with some easy effort. Essentially, all I need to do is make some more shapes, more boxes, rectangles, or other details. Handles for some of the floor panels as if there's access to storage space or vents or something. I can even snip off a corner to make it a little more fun. Before too long, and with no effort at all, I had a nice floor section that was more than big enough for a few 25mm base toppers with some variety. And now I click on the Finish Sketch button, and this takes me back to 3D mode, and all of the 2D tools are gone and the 3D tools are back. But you can still see the geometry from the 2D sketch highlighted with all of the complete shapes in blue. So I will select the Extrude tool, which will pull our 2D sketch features into the third dimension, using it as profile geometry for some new bodies. I'm going to select each two-dimensional shape, and you'll notice that any inner shape is not selected, and so you can choose to nest stuff or leave it blank, which is what I'm doing in this case. For the moment, I will type in a 1mm distance, which will make all of these floor panels 1mm thick. Now, spoilers for later in the video, this isn't enough. I should have made them a little bit thicker. Now, there are loads of tools here that I can use to add these bodies, or cut away at them, or chamfer corners, rotate to make curves, shell to make hollows, and all sorts of other things. Again, play around, have fun, just see what kind of shapes you can make. For this basic tutorial, I'm not going to do any of that, and what I want to do is go back to my original 2D sketch, which has disappeared, but I can bring it back. This arrow opens up a list of sketches. There's only one because we've only made one so far, and the eyeball is grayed out. Click the eyeball and we can make our sketch visible again. So if you do need to use it, you can pull some more geometry. Maybe you want to bring some things to different heights or with different tools. But I want to make a new sketch in exactly the same place as the first. Again, spoilers for a little later in the video, I should have offset this by 0.5 mil or something, but I didn't, and that will cause some issues in a moment. On this new sketch, I can choose to project geometry, and that can bring things from outside the sketch into the sketch, but I actually don't need to do that at the moment. All I need is a 25mm circle and a great big box that will enclose everything. Closing the sketch back into 3D mode, I will pull the body from this new circle into the floor panels that I have already made, but I'm only going to do this 0.5 millimeter thick. I'm also making sure to select the join option here. As this new disc will take up some of the same space as our panels, I want them to all be fused together into one body. Now, if you want it to not fuse together, you can select New Body, and they will be superimposed but not joined, or you can use the Cut tool to remove any of the material that your three-dimensional shape takes up. If I make that second sketch visible again, because it naturally disappears, I can use the big box with the Extrude tool selected as Cut this time, and it will cut away all of the shapes outside of the circle. And hey, would you look at that? One Starship deck base topper for a Star Wars base. How about that? If I look at the bodies list, I should only have one, the base topper. However, because of my mistake earlier and not offsetting that plane, I've got some weirdness going on and there's 12 extra bodies somehow. It's okay, I can work with this for the moment, but really that shouldn't be happening. Anyway, now that we have a body that is just right for what we wanted, we need to export it. You can choose to export the whole file with multiple bodies and keep their positioning information, or export just the single body, and that's what I want to do here, to make sure there's no other things in the STL. I'm pretty much leaving the default settings, but I'm selecting STL binary, and there's a little bit of argument between ASCII and binary, but I go with binary and it works for me. And success was had. One STL ready to chuck to a 3D printer somewhere. But I want some variety, and I think I can do that very easily because of how I've made things so far. And now I can introduce you to one more feature of Fusion 360, and that's down here at the bottom. It is the timeline of all of the operations that I've done in 3D mode. I can move this black playhead icon to go back in time and change things without deleting the operations that I did later on. There's actually a lot of very useful things that this lets us do, but one thing that I will take advantage of is to go back to our second sketch. If I just move the circle to a slightly different place on the floor and jump ahead to the end of the timeline again, all of the other operations that I did to that circle are still applied to the circle but in its new position. And what that does is give me a base topper that looks different from my first. And I can do that again and again and again. And after about 10 minutes of modeling, which should maybe have taken me 3 minutes if I wasn't showing you guys, and then I spent another maybe minute just shifting the circle around and saving over and over again to get different versions, I have 7 of them ready to go for each of the models in the unit. And I throw them into Chitterbox, put on some sports, 3D print them, clean and cure as you would normally expect for a resin print, and now I can work in the physical space rather than the digital. When I painted the Stormtroopers, I only glued 1 foot down, so they should be fairly easy to break away or cut off if needed. And I glued down my base toppers. If you look closely, you can see that they're slightly curled. Partly me making them too thin, the resin isn't strong enough to hold its shape with the warping during the curing of itself, essentially. And so I pressed these down quite firmly onto a flat surface to try and keep them as flat as I could. For the painting, I went really simple. Grey prime with some minor shading of a lighter grey, picking out the vents in darker grey, and then a black wash over it all. And the wash really soaked into the 3D prints that my low-res old printer puts out. And I just need to pop the models back on the bases, and to make sure the superglue is stuck to the resin and not the paint, I scraped away a little bit of the paint under each foot. And that's only because I did the bases afterwards. I would have preferred to have made kind of this type of base topper first and then paint the model and the base together, but it's not a terrible way of doing things and it certainly does work. So let me know in the comments what you think of my base toppers, but more importantly, what do you think of my tutorial? Was it easy enough to follow, and will you be having a go? If you don't want to have a go, that's fine as well. Check the description for a link to my Thingiverse page where I will put up these base toppers for you to download for free. And there's also a donation link down there if you want to support my work in a pay what you want sort of style. But for now, I'm all finished. My models are based and done. I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.